Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer, and today I'm here to predict a murder. What I mean by that is I'm talking about this, the Tile Anti-Theft Mode. So the Tile is a small device that you can put on items that you think you might lose, and it's essentially a tracking device. It allows you to use an app on your phone to find those items later. Now the problem is that something that you can use to find items can also be used by a stalker to track somebody, and that's a concerning issue. Now, previously, Tile had resolved this by allowing for an app that lets you scan for these trackers and potentially remove one if somebody was using it against you in a hostile fashion. However, that doesn't really work if you're trying to use these as a means of theft detection, because if somebody steals something, they can also scan for the tracker and remove it. But Tile had considered that the risk from stalkers and similar people was greater than the issue of theft. Now that's changing because they're introducing the anti-theft mode. And the anti-theft mode's main feature is that it won't allow it to be detected with the Scan and Secure app. So these are now undetectable except by the person who is tracking it. That means that it's way more open for stalkers. Now, Tile says that they've got ways to try to deal with this, but they've said that the reason why they're doing this, they've said, we noticed this gap in the Bluetooth finding category's ability to address theft, which we know is one of the main reasons people use our products. With increasing theft and robbery rates and economic uncertainty on the horizon, we knew the time was right to introduce anti-theft mode. So, then they note, our anti-theft solution empowers users with the choice to make their devices invisible to scan and secure so that criminals will not be able to misuse this feature to locate and disable Tile devices after stealing valuables. Now, this is going to be a bit of an issue. So what did they do to try to address the risk of a stalker using this? Well, they have a few things. They've said, one, requiring a multi-factor ID verification process when activating anti-theft mode to deter the feature from being used for nefarious purposes, such as stalking. I mean, they acknowledge that stalking is a risk here. An acknowledgement from anti-theft mode users that personal information can and will be shared with law enforcement at our discretion, even without a subpoena, to aid in the investigation and prosecution of suspected stalking. And three, a $1 million fine for any individual convicted in a court of law for using Tile devices to illegally track any individual without their knowledge or consent. And note that you have to be convicted in a court of law for that, so that's interesting. We'll talk about some of the issues there. And they note as well, they say our number one priority is keeping our members and their valuables safe. That's why we're offering our members the option to protect their valuables with anti-theft mode, while also implementing all the safeguards we can at the product level, ensuring our products are being used as they were intended. Now, this is something that you can activate now on any Tile device, but this is going to be a problem. And they note this. They say, however, we know that these safeguards are not enough to put an end to the stalking problem altogether. Not only do the existing anti-stalking solutions in the industry eliminate anti-theft functionality, they also put the responsibility of preventing stalking entirely on the victim. I mean, admittedly, that is true, but stalking victims are always going to have to take steps to protect themselves from their stalkers, and it's important that they be able to do so. They also want some industry-wide changes, so they say they want to require across the industry that all location-enabled devices that are small enough to be planted on a person be registered using a real name to remove the ability for these devices to be used anonymously, giving law enforcement the information they need to pursue justice for victims, banning all devices that are specifically marketed for the secret tracking of people, and making stalking a first-time felony offense. Currently, fewer than 1/3 of states classify stalking as a felony in all circumstances. So they want to push for some legal changes here. All right, so let's sort of look at this and see. Basically, you can already guess that I'm going to be saying that this is not enough to deal with stalking issues. And why? Well, the multi-factor ID verification process, most of the people who engage in this kind of stalking behavior are actually relationship partners. Abusive spouses will, or abusive partners will engage in these kinds of behaviors. And those people are probably, first, they might not be worried about the ID verification process, but second, they've got access to someone else's ID, that being the stalking victim themselves. And even stalkers who are not sort of in a relationship with somebody are probably not going to have too much difficulty getting some ID to get around this. Typically, anytime there's some sort of ID verification, it's usually not difficult to circumvent. So I don't think this is going to be a big issue. The other thing is that ultimately, if they get caught, I don't think that the ID verification is necessarily going to be the best way to track somebody down. Usually at the point where you detect a tracking device, in almost all of these cases, you already have a pretty good idea of who it is. So I don't think that's going to be super helpful. Now they say we're going to share this information with law enforcement at their discretion, even without a subpoena. Okay, great. But that may not even point you to the right person. It says, this device is registered to Joe Boggs, but is it actually Joe Boggs, or is it just that somebody has stolen Joe Boggs's ID in order to use this? ID theft is a thing that happens. Now, the really interesting part on this one, and this one is kind of entertaining, is a $1 million fine for any individual convicted in a court of law for using tile devices to illegally track any individual without their knowledge or consent. Well, a couple of problems. First, tile isn't a government, so they don't have the ability to create a fine. They can't, right? That's a fine, would be a criminal penalty, and tile doesn't have that power. Second, in situations where there's some sort of serious violence, if somebody goes and uses one of these devices to stalk somebody and then assaults them and seriously beats them, well, they're probably going to get charged with the beating, but they may not get charged specifically with the using a device to track somebody offense, because there might not be a specific charge for that, and it might not be the most important charge. The violence was the most important charge. So lots of people might dodge this attempt to put a fine on them just by virtue of the fact that they got convicted of something else entirely. Who's going to be sending tile the information on, hey, this is going on? And the only way I can see them trying to impose this $1 million fine is via contract and an attempt to put this in as liquidated damages. The difficulty, of course, is that many jurisdictions limit liquidated damages. The idea of liquidated damages is that there's something in a contract where you say, we agree that the penalty, if something happens, that the damages for this will be a fixed amount and that we're not going to argue it. And this makes a lot of sense in situations where you might have damages that are fairly predictable and you don't want to just get into arguments about it. So in some jurisdictions, and in fact in many jurisdictions, the way this works is that so long as your liquidated damages are a proper estimate of damages, that the court will go with it. But that's not to say that you can implement this as a fine. Usually, or at least where I am, you can't use liquidated damages as a penalty. So it's only to cover damages. What is tile's loss if Joe Boggs gets a tile device and uses it to go after Jane Boggs and, say, kills her? Well, Jane Boggs has a claim. She's been killed, so her estate would be able to sue Joe Boggs for all sorts of things. Her estate might be able to sue Tile, but that's an open question. But it's very difficult to see how Tile was damaged by that homicide. I think that they would have a very hard time establishing that that was a fair assessment of damages, especially when they went ahead and called it a fine. Like, if you want to say that this is a reasonable estimate of damages, you can't go ahead and just announce to the world that you're putting this in as a fine. I don't see this holding up. So how do we make a device like Tile that works as a better, anti-theft method, but that can't be used in this kind of stalking way? Well, if you wanted to set this up as a pure anti-theft measure, the way to do it might be to say that it doesn't even report its location to its owner. And instead, maybe you could say, hey, it's geofenced. So if this particular item moves more than 100 meters, it's going to give an alarm, and start notifying. But that the data itself goes to the police who can investigate this. Because personally, the knowledge of where my stolen items have gone is not necessarily the most useful. I would want the police to pursue that, not myself, because if I'm going after something that's been stolen, it's probably been stolen by somebody more dangerous than I. I am the world's crappiest superhero because my secret weakness is bullets and knives, which kind of takes me out of the running. So I'm not going to be going and tracking down my bike on my own to be like, hey, I'm Billy Badass risking my life for a bicycle. I'm probably going to want to send the police in for that. Yeah, this would be a fairly simple change that eliminates this issue. Tile is over-promising on the safety and under-delivering, and someone's going to get killed. That is, unfortunately, there will be a case out there. Might not be this year, might not be next year, but sometime somebody is going to get killed, and there will be a tracking device, and quite likely a Tile if they're the only person doing this on the market. Yeah. So this is a concerning development, and we'll have to see how the law responds to it. I actually suspect that that lawmakers may not have the reaction that Tile expects. Tile seems to be thinking that lawmakers are going to be like, yes, let's facilitate this technology, we'll do these things. But they may instead say, we're going to have some issues with this, especially if they're in a situation where they're passing a law named after a murder victim. I'm not a big fan of laws named after a murder victim, but you gotta acknowledge they're always reactionary, and they always kind of hammer a problem. So, Tile, I think you're playing with fire here. Anyway, those are some thoughts. I did have some people who were discussing this. Nobody sort of raised this with me directly, but I saw the discussions and I was like, I have some opinions. So let me know in the comments section what you think. I'm not really of the mind of like, this is a situation of like, there ought to be a law or anything like that. But I think Tile might be behaving irresponsibly, and that they're really risking that a law might happen regardless of what I think. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. Please like this video, share it, subscribe to see more content, hit the notification bell if you want to see it right away, and really appreciate all of that. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level, the CCFR, David Michaud, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Jane Babin Luxor. And at the $20 level, Lindsay Metcalf, Kyle Fox, Haywire, Gerald to the Bailey, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, and Vicky. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.